Hi, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for May 2021. And for this month's recording, there might be dog noises in the background because I'm recording in the bedroom and the dog has decided he needs to be in here with me. So we'll see how this goes. I've got a lot of stories this month. I think it's 24. So let's get started right away. My first story pick this month is Before Whom Evil Trembles by Namo in Anathema. And I'm going to start with a quote from this story. You are the kind of ballerina whose whispers paint red the sky under which you sleep, the kind who stays behind and rides the air long after everyone else has gone home to rest. You are the kind of ballerina who does not know rest, because it is the only way out of this room, and you have to get out. You have no choice. Now, Namo's story is a masterpiece of lyrical, evocative prose, combined with a story that is sharp as a razor. A ballerina with a harrowing backstory works herself to the bone in order to succeed in her chosen artistic profession. But the memories of her past never leave her, and the world around her won't let her forget that they don't believe she fits in or belongs, or that she can become what she longs to be. And yet, below the surface, the ballerina has a strength that is only revealed at the utmost end. I love how this story weaves together memory, the powers of ancient deities, and present day hostility. It's an outstanding story from an impressive new issue of Anathema. My next story pick, actually, the next two story picks are both from the same issue of Beneath Ceaseless Skies. The first one is Worth the Whistling by Adriana C. Grigore in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. Now, this is a haunting story about a community where violence and murder always close, where the bones of those who have been killed are put into a strange area called the Whistling. Agneta has lived at the edge of the Whistling for as long as she can remember, learning how to write the bones from her grandfather, who is now gone. Carving words into the bones works as a kind of magic to free the ghosts that linger in the Whistling, but the work must be done carefully so as not to raise the ire of the villagers. And then one night, Agneta watches as yet another woman is murdered, and afterwards someone comes knocking on her door, and this time it's not a ghost yet. This is a sorrow-filled, beautifully written, very moving story about ghosts and people who linger, bound by memories and darkness and tendrils of love, and about how to set them free and how to set yourself free. The next story is The Woods Echo Back by Tanya Ford-Walker. Like I said, this one's also from Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And I got to start with a quote from this story because it describes the creature that is at the heart of this tale. In the next snare, the one by the lake, they find the lindworm. Utterly still at first, she looks like a patch of spring snow spread alongside the taut rope, luminous in the early morning light. She is wolf-sized, hawk-sharp, white and regal as a swan. The trees thin out at the lake's edge, admitting a seep of rising sun between the narrow trunks that traces her motionless form in pale gold and rose and snow shadow blue, from sleek head to arrow-tipped tail. Now, I love every bit of this wrenching and gorgeous story about Sean, a boy who rarely speaks and who has recently lost his mother. She was one of the few people who really understood him and brought some joy into his life. He lives in a cottage in the woods with his father, a trapper, a man who is harsh in word and deed and who does not treat Sean with much kindness. But when Sean and his father find this rare and magical lindworm in the woods, everything changes. I won't give away any more of the story, but I love the lindworm. You will too. And these characters. It's a rich and compelling tale, and the ending had me at the edge of my seat. Next up is My Lakeside Graveyard by Peter S. Drang in Flash Fiction Online. And this is some great flash-sized horror. The setting is creepy, and the narrator is very unsettling as soon as the story opens. There is a graveyard by the lake, but there isn't enough space for all the dead that need to be buried there. So while some corpses are planted in the ground, others must be dug up and relocated. But one old corpse is not happy about this procedure and resists, and, well, things get worse from there. Fabulous horror that will definitely haunt me. My next story pick is Balfour in the Desert by Fargo Tabaki in Strange Horizons. Balfour is journeying across the desert in this very strange story, a very beautiful story, and very unsettling story. Balfour is journeying, and he is hunting a creature that both fascinates and frightens him. It says in the story. Somewhere ahead of him, the creature is running. When he finds it, he will kill it, and things will be different. Now, Balfour is really utterly lost as he travels through a changeable landscape with a person the story calls the Arab. Balfour himself is changeable too, vacillating between helplessness and senseless cruelty, between the rags he wears in the desert and his memories of the fine clothes and suits and the power that he once wielded, though he cannot quite remember who or what he was then. In his moments of cruelty, Balfour almost remembers himself, who he is supposed to be, and why he is even in the desert at all. And this story is, it's amazing. It's a shape-shifting, haunting fever dream. It's about revenge and retribution and more besides, and it lingered in my mind long after reading. My next two story picks are both from Apex magazine. The first one is Mishpoki and Ash by Sidney Rossman Reich. It takes place in Hungary around the time of Hitler's reign in Germany, and there's a Jewish girl named Magda who builds a golem. She builds it from metal scraps to help out around the house, and the golem does whatever Magda teaches it to do. She tries to teach it to be something good in a world that is becoming ever worse for her and the people around her. She teaches the golem not to lie, not to steal, not to hurt anyone. And while the golem obeys, the wisdom of those rules are not always readily apparent to the golem. Eventually, the war and the persecution of Jews catches up to Magda and her family, and by then, the relationship between Magda and her creation has changed. There is such a painful weight of sadness and grief in this story. There's a darkness that becomes ever deeper as the story goes on, and it almost consumes both Magda and the golem. Powerful and devastating story. The next story from Apex is All This Darkness by Jennifer R. Donahue. And it has this beautiful line. Nobody ever says we have coal in our veins. They don't have to. We have black half moons under our nails when we wake in the morning. We ooze like oil when we skin a knee, split a knuckle fighting. We aren't afraid of the dark or closed spaces. We don't crave the daylight like some people. Oh, I love the voice and the vibe and the darkness of this gorgeously wrought story about the children living in a town where the mountain and the coal mine looms over everything and always has. But then the mine closes and the town begins to shut down too. Shops and schools and more goes away bit by bit, as if the town is dying. But the children find a place to belong anyway, picking up the pieces of the broken mine, the broken mountain, and the broken world. My next story pick is Peristalsis by Vaira Chandrasekhara in The Deadlands, first issue. And I'll start with a quote from the story. This is that kind of show. We know when another year has passed, when the New Year birds hoot in the background. There are only two kinds of show: the kind where people grow older and the kind where they don't. We, the fandom, love the first kind best. We love this show so much. This is a profoundly surreal story about a TV show, or is it? And the audience watching that show, if that is what they are. And there's a sense of ghostly, unspoken, barely perceived connection between the show and the audience, as if they are all connected, but in ways even they themselves cannot understand. The story is beautiful and unsettling. I picked a lot of unsettling stories this month, with a sense of existential dread seeping through in every part. This is a story that I keep turning over in my head. It's a stunner from an excellent first issue of The Deadlands. And now there's going to be some barking in the background because the dog woke up. But I'll keep on going here. My next story pick is Pros and Cons of Spending the First Weeks of Your Son's Life in the NICU by Timothy Moody in Daily SF. I love this story, and it cuts really deep for me. It's about, like the title says, about spending your baby's first weeks in the NICU, and which is something I actually did with my oldest. I spent 10 days in the NICU with my son who was born prematurely, and this story it's so raw and so jagged and so tender and lovely and painful. It made me cry, and yet it doesn't end in grief and hopelessness. It's thoroughly wonderful. I'll read a quote from it. Pro, the doctor you meet with says you did the right thing bringing your son in when you did. You caught whatever is happening early. So perceptive of the little changes happening in his behavior. Con, you register the words but hear the tone, see the look in her eyes that says, you are a failure as a parent. There is something wrong with your baby because there is something wrong with you. It's a great story. Next up is Weaving by January Adams in Fireside. I'm going to start with a quote from this story, too, because I just love this. A week before Lori declared an end to our friendship by throwing a cheesecake into the river, I found the tessitura sitting in her closet. At the time, I had no idea what it was or what it was called. It just looked like a small roll of Scotch tape in a curved container with thin, gold-trimmed red ribbon where the tape should be. The roll was warm to the touch and buzzed faintly. So this story is a trip. It's about transformation of a person and of relationships, and it's about things ending and new beginnings and how things can end even though that doesn't mean we forget them, and even though we might carry those memories with us. I love how the story does say that endings are not automatically bad. Sometimes, often even, relationships end, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just life. And you go on to other things. I also love the mysterious item, the tessitura, at the heart of the story, and how its enigmatic nature reveals itself bit by bit. This is a warm, heart-healing story, in my opinion. Next up is Taking Control of Your Life in 5 Easy Steps by P.H. Lee in Nightmare. This is a masterfully chilling and sharp as a razor's edge story. I'm going to read a quote from it. In order to address the problems of your life, you must address the underlying causes. Understand that your reality is not the only reality. There is another reality which we only perceive through mirrors and reflections. I love this. Mirrors are excellent for horror, in my opinion, and this story really makes use of that. In the story's intro, Lee says, "Taking control of your life in 5 easy steps is inspired by and dedicated to all the people who have tried to sell me their quick and easy, surefire fixes for my mental illness." And you'll see in the story how well this is captured in there. This is a great story. Next up is Queen Minnie's Last Ride by Amy Ogden in Apparition Lit. This is a weird and wonderful Western flavored story where we find out the horrible, harrowing truth about Ruth's spook gun. Now, a spook gun in the story is a gun that held on tight to the last soul it had killed. And the ghost in Ruth's gun is the ghost of the ferocious and indomitable Queen Minnie, who tries to lure Ruth away from the life she is living, whispering desires and dreams into her head that are hard to resist. Ruth is trying to find a way to free herself from the spook gun and Queen Minnie without trapping someone else as a ghost in the gun, and without cursing someone else with the dangerous ghost within her spook gun. It's a fabulous story, and I love the intertwining of Western and speculative fiction here. Also, Ruth is one heck of a protagonist. Next up is For Lack of a Bed by John Wiswell in Diabolical Plots. This is a story about Noemi, who suffers from chronic pain, and sleep is hard for her to come by, at least until her friends tell her about a free couch. As soon as Noemi touches the couch, she knows there's something special about it, and soon she is getting the very best sleep of her life, untroubled by pain. As it turns out, the couch has its own secrets and its own agenda, and that's not altogether good news for Noemi. Wiswell's stories are always a delight, and this one is no exception. Also, Wiswell won the Nebula Award for his brilliant story Open House on Haunted Hill, which was also in Diabolical Plots. Next up is the story Homebody by Kyle Winkler in Coffin Bell. I'm not sure I can accurately describe how strange and haunting and also darkly funny the story is. It's set in the not-too-distant future, where two strange men from an even more mysterious organization called Tableau come to visit KB, the story's narrator. They seem to have a serious interest in her neighbor, a man called Yardley, and eventually KB is recruited to perform various tasks for Tableau, finding things, taking things, and spying on Yardley. This is a darkly brilliant story that is about maps, cartography, finding patterns in items and in your own body that mirror or echo or maybe shape the world. You go right under my skin, and the things you might find under your skin in the story, I'm just saying. Next up is The Steel Magnolia Metaphor by Jennifer Lee Rossman in Escape Pod. It's narrated by Elora Sengupta, and it's a funny, poignant, and heartbreaking story about Astrid, who really doesn't like metaphors or hugs. And it's about her relationship with her family, especially her mom, who has cancer. Astrid has made a steel magnolia, a contraption full of razor-sharp metal flowers that can kill mosquitoes. Her invention is inspired by her mom's love of the movie Steel Magnolias, but Astrid hasn't watched the movie, and she has a hard time understanding why she'd want to watch it once her mother explains that it's not a movie about magnolias made of steel at all, and in fact includes no robot trees at all. I love Astrid and her mom, and the way their relationship is both loving and fraught in the story. It's a wonderful tale through and through. Next up is Lang Sweer by Nadia Mikhail in Cast of Wonders, and it's narrated by Fash Wahab. This story begins by telling us that in Malay folk tales, the Langsweer is a woman who has died giving birth to a stillborn child. After death, the Langsweer roams the world looking for its child, and when it can't find it, it enters other homes and drains other children of their blood. Now, we soon realize that this story is told from the point of view of an owl. And owls particularly fear Langsweers. The reason why is because a Langsweer can keep an owl, meaning it enters its body and uses it to seek out its prey. I'll quote the story. My grandmother told me, keep away from women having difficult births. They can sense you there. After death, they will rise up and find you. We don't know what it is that attracts them to owls. But the owl that's narrating the story doesn't just fear the Langsweer that comes to hunt it down. This owl also feels compassion for the woman she once was, and even the creature she becomes. It's a beautifully told story of pain and horror, and also the possibility of redemption. Be warned, though, that this story is strong stuff, so do check out the content warnings. My next story pick is Unseelie Brothers by Fran Wilde in Uncanny Magazine. Oh, this is a sumptuous adventure that involves the most amazing clothing created by the Unseelie Brothers, working in a shop that may appear whenever and where the price you pay might not be due just in money. There are so many amazing magical dresses in the story and pieces of jewelry, and though all the dresses are striking enough and beautiful, the effect they have on the wearer can be unpredictable. I love how this story has a dark edge as it explores the dangers inherent in any deal you make in a fairy tale, but that it's also full of friendship and love and humor. It's just an absolute delight from beginning to end. Next up is The 21 Bus Line by Gabriela Santiago in the Dark. And this is an absolutely wonderful, utterly weird, and profoundly trippy story. A woman gets on the bus. Now, there is a very strange woman in a very peculiar fur coat when she gets on the bus. And as she strikes up a rather one-sided conversation, things get increasingly bizarre and increasingly menacing. The best part about the story is really the pitch-perfect dialogue of what it's like if you're approached by a strange stranger on the bus. And that's the deeply surreal vibe. And there are so many twists and turns that make this story stand out for me. It's just beautifully done by Santiago. And this story is part of a fabulous issue of The Dark that also includes The Haunted House of Family Horrors in Crooked House by Nina Kariki Hoffman, the devastating ghost story Water Child by Frances Ugamba, and the unforgettably harrowing and fierce of Claw and Bone by Susan Palumbo. Next up is The Last Stanza of General File by H.L. Fullerton in Lackingtons, number 23. And the theme for this issue of Lackingtons is battles. In this particular story, a general goes to visit the place where she once fought in the war, a place where she won victories, but where so many other people lost their lives. Fullerton links art and poetry with war and violence in intricate and uniquely imagined ways in the story, and there's so much depth and nuance as the general goes to find a part of her past and maybe create something new from what once was. I'll be thinking about this story for a very long time, and if you want to read more by Fullerton, you should check out The Boy Who Was Mistaken for a Fairy King, which was published by Annerlunda Inc. Next up is Mysteries of Visio Cherries by Rio Johan and Samovar. This is a story about a fruit engineer. It starts out as science fiction because fruit engineers design new fruits, but it soon adds this twist, several twists, that make it a mystery tinged with horror. Now, the fruit engineer in the story is called Quodvide, and he invents an amazing cherry. And while it seems to have amazing properties, it turns out to be rather more problematic and insidious than anyone first thought. And when this fruit engineer disappears, the police realize he left behind clues hidden in texts and documents he wrote. And these are clues he seems to have tried to hide, even from himself. It's creepy and unsettling and just plain awesome. And it's part of a short story collection called Rekayasa Bua, Fruit Engineering, that will be published this year. A whimsical science fiction short story collection about fruits and mysteries of Vizio cherries is a part of this short story collection. Definitely check it out. And my final story pick for this month is Golden Girl by A.M. Gue in Koryo. Jessie has been taken from her mother's and adopted by a seemingly picture-perfect family, but find Jessie disappointing in almost every way. Gue spins a fantastically unsettling, deeply disturbing story that explores the problematic issue of transracial adoption, and also the issue about who is considered to be a good and worthy parent in a world where some people are considered worthless and wrong by mainstream, so-called polite society. The description of the story as reminiscent of Get Out and the Stepford Wives is spot on. I saw that online, and I agree with it. I also love how Jessie is no meek victim, though she is certainly treated horribly, and she finds ways to resist and even strike back. This is part of a fantastic new issue of Koryo, which also includes a wonderful nonfiction essay / review titled Seeing Myself in Unexpected Places by Jamie Omeyer, which is about adoption, just like Golden Girl, and identity and families and more. It's both moving and brilliant. And that's all I had for this month. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back next month. See you then.